June 20th, 1944. 0420 hours. Near Houffalize, Ardennes Forest. Snow drifted in thin sheets across the ridgeline. The night sky held a pale gray glow that came from a low moon buried behind cloud cover. The cold pressed into every gap in the uniform. Each breath left a thin vapor trail that hung for a moment before the wind pulled it away. The forest floor groaned under frozen branches. The Ardennes looked still, but every man in the forward positions knew the silence never lasted. German infiltration teams moved with precision. They studied gaps in the lines and hunted for isolated observation posts. A single mistake could cost a crew its life and cost the division its eyes. The American platoon holding the observation line understood the danger. They had watched two nearby posts overrun in the last 48 hours. Both units tried to withdraw along marked retreat lanes. Both lanes fell under fire when enemy scouts flanked from the north and cut the path early. The losses were heavy. Command responded with orders to hold longer and retreat only when instructed. Those orders made sense on paper. In the dense Ardennes they turned into death sentences. Private Elias Thorne listened to the briefings each night with growing concern. The officers repeated the same guidance. Hold position. Watch the tree line. Fall back along designated trails. He respected command discipline. He also understood ropes, anchors, and controlled movement in tight spaces. He spent years in dark catwalks above stages, mapping exits where performers could move without hesitation. He knew how to trace a path even when visibility collapsed. When he looked at the Ardennes terrain, he saw choke points, dead ends, and exposed routes that guaranteed casualties. Thorne studied the grove behind the forward post. The slope dipped sharply. Thick clusters of spruce created narrow channels of movement. Underbrush formed a tangled barrier that slowed any retreat. Snow covered pits. Fallen branches acted like snares. A retreating unit could not run fast. Noise from broken twigs would alert German scouts. The official retreat lanes curved toward open ground, which meant clear sight lines for enemy rifles once contact began. Thorne knew the problem. He also saw a possible solution. He approached Sergeant Mallon with a simple request. He asked for permission to lay a small rope guide behind the post, only a few yards long, to help the crew feel the way during a silent withdrawal. Mallon looked at him with mild amusement. He allowed the idea but warned against turning the forest into a maze of string. Thorne nodded. He walked into the woods and began measuring distances by touch and memory. By morning he had a short test path ready. A rope coil rested near a spruce trunk. The line ran low along the ground, tied lightly to hidden anchors. The knots were simple to follow with gloves. The path curved through a natural depression, bypassing thick brush. It ended near a narrow drainage cut that dropped away from expected German approach lines. Thorne showed Mallon how the rope guided movement without noise or hesitation. Mallon shrugged. He did not object, but he did not see the value. Other soldiers noticed the setup. Some laughed. They called it a Boy Scout trick. Others joked that Thorne planned to rappel his way back to Chicago. Doubt came from every direction. Thorne focused on improving the system. He expanded the path slowly. He added a second coil to form a branching route. He marked the lines with small knots that counted distance without needing sight. He tested them at night with his eyes closed. He crawled, walked, and ducked along the ropes until he could move through the darkness at a steady pace. 2 days later, a lieutenant inspected the post. He saw the rope lines and demanded an explanation. Mallon described Thorne's idea. The lieutenant dismissed it outright. He argued that retreat paths must be clear on maps and known by every officer, not improvised by privates. He ordered the ropes removed. Mallon relayed the order with discomfort. Thorne accepted it. He waited until the lieutenant left, then quietly coiled the lines and stored them. That night, enemy probes increased. Scouts tested the perimeter with precision. They cut gaps through the snow and moved silently between trees. American outposts reported flares. They fired short bursts to deter movement. The atmosphere shifted. The German offensive pressure grew stronger. Mallon reconsidered the ropes. He called Thorne aside and asked whether the system could be rebuilt quickly. Thorne said yes. He spent the next several hours working through freezing wind. He restored the original guideline, then added 2 more branches to form a small escape network. He tested anchor points by loading them with controlled tension. He checked the knots for grip. He adjusted the path to avoid a new fallen tree that blocked the right flank. When he finished, he briefed the platoon on how to use the ropes. Some listened with polite skepticism. Others seemed annoyed. Thorne gave clear instructions. Stay low. Hold the line with your left hand. Count knots. Follow the slope down until you reach the drainage cut. Move without speaking. By dawn on December 20, 1944, the forest felt heavier. Snow fell in slow clusters that made visibility worse. Crisp branches cracked deeper in the woods, which meant enemy teams were closer than usual. American machine gunners held their positions. Spotters scanned the ridge through frosted scopes. Thorne stood near the first rope coil and checked the line again for tension. Everything was ready. At 0650 hours, the German assault began. Mortar rounds hit the far edge of the tree line. A second volley landed 50 yards from the observation post. The ground shook. Snow leapt from branches and fell in thick sheets. Machine guns opened fire. German infantry advanced in controlled waves. Their movement came not from the front but from the flank. They attempted to circle the post and close the retreat lane before the Americans could respond. Malin shouted orders. The forward team held fire until targets appeared between trees. Rifle shots cracked through the fog. The Germans pushed harder. A squad moved behind a cluster of trunks and sprinted toward the designated retreat trail. They intended to cut the path at its midpoint. The lieutenant's maps predicted a linear attack. Thorne's instincts predicted a flank approach. That prediction proved correct. Malin saw the flank closing and gave the order to withdraw. The official trail was already compromised. German scouts were minutes from blocking it completely. Thorne grabbed the first rope coil and shouted for the team to follow. They hesitated. The rope system looked unreliable. The pressure grew with every passing second. German fire intensified. Malin ordered them to move with Thorne. They dropped low and followed the rope into the brush. The path curved behind the slope. Snow muffled their steps. Knots guided their hands. Visibility dropped to nearly zero as smoke drifted through the trees. Thorne moved with steady pace. He knew each anchor point. He knew every twist in the line. The rope kept the platoon together. It kept them oriented when the forest turned confusing. The forest swallowed the platoon as it followed the rope line deeper into the depression behind the forward post. German fire cracked overhead. Splinters scattered across the snow. Thorne kept his left hand tight on the rope. He felt each knot as it passed. 1 knot meant the first turn was close. 2 knots meant the slope would drop. 3 knots warned of a narrow cut where men had to move single file. He did not slow. The system worked only if momentum stayed steady. Malin stayed near the rear. He checked that no one broke contact with the line. The rope pulled everyone forward. Men who could barely see 3 feet ahead trusted the tension in their gloves more than the fading light. The snow thickened. Wind shifted direction. Enemy voices echoed faintly behind them. German scouts reached the empty observation post and saw the Americans were gone. They expected movement along the official retreat lane. Instead they found silence. The platoon pushed along the second branch of the rope network. Thorne had rigged this section with shallow loops that forced men to crouch to avoid a low-hanging limb. The limb acted as natural camouflage from above. German patrols often scanned for movement through gaps in the canopy. This path stayed invisible. The rope guided the men through the lowest points of the terrain. It saved time. It saved noise. They reached the drainage cut. Thorne dropped into it first. His boots slid on packed snow. The slope was sharper than he expected. He steadied himself by gripping a branch buried under ice. The drainage provided a corridor that ran away from the flank attack. No officer marked it on a map because it looked unusable from the surface. Dense shrubs blocked the entrance. Underneath the shrubs, Thorne found enough room to clear a passage. The rope coil he placed earlier guided the platoon along the hidden route. German scouts swept the observation post more thoroughly. They fired flares that lit the treetops. The flares cast long shadows across nearby ridges. They searched for footprints that pointed toward the retreat lane. They found only partial tracks near the rope's starting point. Snowfall had already covered most of the disturbance. The scouts spread out to locate the Americans. They expected panic and sound. They did not expect a silent movement pattern that avoided predictable paths. The platoon continued down the drainage cut. It narrowed in places. The men moved in tight formation. Thorne signaled with short taps on the rope to warn about sudden drops. He knew each hurdle because he crawled this route alone at night to prepare for the worst possible moment. The test runs paid off. The platoon advanced with minimal confusion. They stayed below ridgeline sight lines. Snow absorbed the sound of their boots. At 0730 hours, German forces shifted their maneuver again. They pushed 2 squads to intercept the retreat lane. They found the lane empty. They assumed the Americans fled earlier. A German NCO ordered a sweep north into the densest section of the woods. The scouts moved aggressively. They expected to find at least a few stragglers. Thorne's path stayed south and dipped deeper into covered terrain. The Germans' sweep missed them by 70 yards. The rope line turned once more. A sequence of knots told Thorne they were entering the final segment. This section ended near a fallen spruce whose trunk provided visual cover from enemy vantage points. Beyond that point, the rope system stopped. The men would need to spread out and regroup in a small hollow that Malin selected as a rally point. The hollow held a shallow depression that blocked wind. It was ideal for quiet consolidation. Thorne reached the final anchor point. He checked the men behind him. Every soldier who began the escape made it to the end. Malin exhaled with visible relief. They huddled close and listened to the distant sounds of continued fighting at the observation post. Mortars hit the abandoned trenches. Rifle fire scattered across the ridge. The Germans believed they had pinned the Americans. They did not realize the entire platoon was now a mile away, intact and ready to relay information. Malin signaled for radio contact. The radio man extended the antenna cautiously. Snow collected on the fabric cover of his pack. He tuned the set with gloved hands. The signal crackled. He transmitted the platoon's survival status. Then he relayed the key intelligence Thorne observed during the escape. Thorne's positioning behind the post gave him a clear understanding of enemy advance direction. He identified the angle of the flank attack and noted at least 2 machine gun teams positioning near a ridge. Command confirmed the data and shifted artillery accordingly. The impact came 20 minutes later. American guns adjusted their aim. They hit the German staging points near the ridge. The flanking movement collapsed. German infantry pulled back to avoid further losses. The observation post, once threatened with complete encirclement, became irrelevant as a tactical target. The platoon's survival and intelligence transmission altered the local battle outcome. Malin looked at Thorne with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. The rope system, mocked for days, saved the entire unit. It avoided contact. It prevented casualties. It delivered intelligence that shaped the fight. The platoon rested briefly before moving again to rejoin the main line. They carried their weapons low. They stayed alert. Snow continued to fall. The forest remained hostile. As they marched, men whispered about the rope lines. Some who doubted the idea apologized quietly. Others simply nodded at Thorne with respect. He did not respond with pride. He focused on ensuring no rope segment remained behind that could reveal the route. He and Malin doubled back for a moment to recover the coils placed near the hollow. They packed them into their gear. The forest returned to its natural layout. The unit reached a secondary American position by 09:10 hours. Officers asked how the platoon avoided encirclement. Malin answered with direct clarity. He explained the rope coil escape path. Some officers looked surprised. Others expressed skepticism that such a simple technique could work under combat pressure. Malin gave precise details. He emphasized the silence, speed, and guidance the system provided. He described how the path avoided predictable lines of advance. Command took notes. Thorne stayed quiet during the discussion. He cleaned snow from his gear. He tightened the straps of his pack. He checked his rifle for frozen moisture. He knew his skill set came from theater rigging, not military doctrine. Yet the battlefield conditions matched his strengths. The Ardennes punished rigid thinking. It rewarded controlled movement through tight spaces. His experience filled a gap the manuals did not cover. Reports from nearby units confirmed more German infiltration attempts. Several small American teams were already missing. Command issued a warning. They urged units to strengthen retreat procedures and consider any method that improved survivability. Malin pointed at Thorne. He repeated that the rope system worked in real combat. Officers asked for a demonstration. Thorne agreed. He led them to a test area behind the secondary position. He set up a short rope guide using natural cover. Officers followed the path while wearing field gear and heavy coats. They observed how the knots signaled distance. They noted how quickly a man could move while nearly blind. Some officers changed their tone. They saw the advantage for outposts positioned in dense woods where visibility collapsed during combat. The demonstration ended with one request. Command asked Thorne to write clear instructions so other platoons could build similar escape guides. Thorne agreed. He began drafting notes with a pencil worn to half its length. He wrote down knot patterns. He wrote distances. He wrote anchor techniques that blended with the forest. He explained how to trace curves that avoided likely German lines of fire. He kept the language simple enough for any squad to follow. Thorne finished the first draft of his instructions before noon. Malin reviewed the notes and added brief comments on how the platoon used the system under pressure. An officer collected the pages and sent a runner to battalion headquarters. Thorne expected nothing further. He believed the report would sit in a pile of field suggestions that rarely gained attention. He focused on reinforcing his rifle squad positions and preparing for another night of cold surveillance. The weather worsened as afternoon settled over the Ardennes. Wind picked up, shaking snow loose from high branches. The forest dimmed earlier than usual. Heavy cloud cover turned the sky into a dull sheet of steel. The platoon received orders to assist in setting up new observation points along a secondary ridge. These positions offered wider fields of view but little natural protection. Every man worked with numb hands as they dug shallow pits and packed snow to build crude berms. Thorne walked the perimeter and studied the terrain. He saw potential choke points where rope guides could help. He noted narrow gaps between trees that led toward dead ground. The platoon would use these positions for at least one night. If a German probe arrived, they needed reliable escape options. Malin noticed Thorne's focus and asked if another rope network was possible. Thorne said yes. The officers granted permission without argument this time. He started working at 1,500 hours. He tied low-tension anchors against trunks where bark patterns concealed the cord. He intertwined segments with fallen branches so the rope looked like natural debris. He measured distances by steps. He spread 3 coils across the rear of the new forward line. 2 provided straight withdrawal lanes. The third curved sharply to avoid an exposed ridge edge that enemy marksmen could cover from a distance. He finished the layout as daylight faded. The platoon gathered near a small fire trench and waited for rations. Word spread that division intelligence reviewed Thorne's notes. They believed the rope concept could help save reconnaissance teams that often operated in tight forest pockets. Morale rose slightly. Innovation was rare in the field. Seeing one soldier's idea reach headquarters gave the men a sense that their experience mattered. At 1800 hours, forward units reported movement. German patrols increased activity along the northern approach. Sporadic rifle fire echoed in the distance. The platoon settled into defensive readiness. Men checked ammunition. They tested radios. They prepared grenades. Thorne checked the rope lines again. He tightened one anchor that loosened when the wind shifted a branch. He memorized the knot order one more time. Darkness came fast. Moonlight flickered behind moving clouds. The forest became a maze of shadows. The temperature dropped. Frost crawled along weapon barrels and helmet rims. Thorne stayed near the first rope coil. He listened to the woods. Distant cracks and muffled steps hinted at enemy movement. The Germans had mastered silent infiltration through the Ardennes. They navigated dense trees with precision. At 1930 hours, a message arrived from battalion headquarters. The lieutenant read the short note aloud. Command approved further testing of the rope system in selected forward positions. They authorized each platoon in the sector to build at least one guideline for emergency withdrawal. Thorne's concept, once mocked, now received official recognition. The men exchanged looks of surprise and pride. The night grew colder. The platoon kept watch. Thorne adjusted his gloves and sat near a fallen log. He stayed alert for sound more than sight. His experience as a stage rigger taught him to rely on subtle cues. A shift in wind. A faint scrape of metal. A brief silence between natural forest noises. The Ardennes had a rhythm. When it changed, danger followed. At 2100 hours, the rhythm shifted. The forest quieted for several seconds. No branch cracked. No bird moved. A stillness settled. Malin sensed it too. He moved along the line and whispered to stay ready. Thorne stared into the darkness. Something pressed against the edge of hearing. He tilted his head. Low voices in German. 3. Possibly 4 men. They moved from the northeast, using thick spruce clusters for cover. The Americans waited for confirmation. A faint beam of light cut through the trees. A German soldier carried a shuttered lamp, opening it briefly to signal direction. Thorne gripped his rifle. Malin pointed to 2 machine gunners who repositioned slowly. They aimed toward the northeast cluster. Silence returned, broken only by wind. A twig snapped. The Germans heard it too. Someone shifted positions near the American line. German scouts raised their weapons. Thorne held steady. He wanted to avoid firing prematurely. A single shot would trigger a full engagement. The goal was to observe until necessary. The first German scout stepped into a narrow clearing. Snow crunched under his boot. A second scout followed. They scanned the ground for tracks. They looked toward a natural break between trees that aligned with one of the new observation points. They advanced with caution. Malin signaled. 2 riflemen prepared to fire. Then a distant burst of automatic fire erupted from another sector. It came from an American unit encountering a separate patrol. The sound startled the German scouts. They crouched and angled their weapons. The distraction forced Malin's hand. He whispered a fire order. 2 rifles cracked. The first German scout fell instantly. The second dove behind a tree and shouted to his unit. Gunfire spread across the ridge. German patrols moved quickly. They attempted to flank the new positions. Thorn recognized the pattern. He saw how they tried to cut withdrawal lanes as they did days earlier. He grabbed the rope coil and called to 3 men near him. They repositioned behind the log and prepared to fall back if the line broke. The Germans pressed the attack. Mortars came next. A round exploded 20 yards away, scattering snow and dirt. Another burst hit the rear side of the main trench. The concussion shook the men. Malin ordered a partial withdrawal. He needed to avoid losing the entire line. Thorn nodded. He moved toward the first guide rope and signaled for men to follow once positions collapsed. The Germans advanced in staggered formation. They fired short bursts to suppress American defenders. The ridge filled with smoke and drifting snow. Communications became difficult. A radio operator shouted for updated coordinates. Malin pointed at the rope path. He trusted it after the morning's escape. He instructed the radio man to stay close to Thorn. Another German squad appeared on the left flank. They fired into the brush and tried to bypass the forward trench. They aimed to strike the Americans from behind. This mirrored the tactic used earlier. The pattern was clear. Thorn's rope system existed for this moment. Malin gave the order. The forward rifle teams disengaged in pairs. They crawled backward through snow. They fired short bursts to cover each movement. Thorn waited for the last pair to reach him. He felt the ground vibrate from mortar impacts. Snow cascaded from overhead branches. He held the rope coil steady. The platoon began to withdraw along the guide line. The path dipped into a narrow chute that avoided the incoming flanking fire. The rope directed their steps. Men gripped it firmly. They lowered their heads to avoid low-hanging limbs. Visibility plunged as smoke drifted across the route. The rope kept them from losing orientation. The Germans realized the Americans were withdrawing. They rushed forward. They attempted to cut the escape. 3 scouts pushed through the northeast cluster to intercept. Thorn sensed the urgency. He moved faster. He signaled with short rope taps for the men behind him to increase pace. The platoon reached the second branch point. Thorn chose the curved route that circled a natural depression. This section of the rope path avoided open angles where enemy marksmen could fire accurately. He designed this path after studying the ridge for hours the previous afternoon. It offered their best chance to stay ahead of the Germans. Thorn led the column into the curved section of the rope path. Snow thickened the air. Each breath stung the lungs. The rope guided them through a tight bend that forced every man to turn sideways to avoid a heavy fallen limb. The limb hid their silhouettes. It also blocked any glances from German marksmen searching for movement. Thorn's hands moved steadily. He felt each knot and counted distance without speaking. Behind him, Malin checked the rear. German scouts closed fast. Their footsteps crunched through the snow with rising confidence. They fired into the brush, hoping to force the Americans into a panicked run. The rope kept the platoon controlled. It kept them together. No one strayed. No one froze. They stayed low and followed the path that Thorn knew by memory. The Germans spread out across the ridge. A squad leader ordered 2 men to swing around the depression to cut off the American escape. He assumed the Americans ran along predictable ground. He moved his scouts toward a shallow saddle that connected to the most direct withdrawal lane. He did not know the rope path swung far below that saddle and slid behind the thickest spruce barrier in the area. The rope turned again. Thorn recognized the knot pattern. They had reached the section that followed a narrow trench formed by years of water runoff. The trench offered cover from small arms fire. It also absorbed noise. The men dropped into it and moved quickly. Snow made the floor slick but manageable. Thorn dug his boots into the frozen sediment and pulled the rope line with a controlled grip. German gunfire grew louder. Bullets cut through branches overhead. Shards of bark scattered across helmets and coats. The platoon stayed below the line of fire. They trusted Thorn's judgment. Malin pushed the rear faster. He knew the pursuing scouts needed only a few more seconds to reach their previous position. Thorn felt another knot. 3 in sequence. This marked the descent point. The slope dropped sharply. The rope ran along the safest angle down the incline. Thorn braced himself and stepped over the lip. His boots slid, but the rope steadied him. The men behind followed. Snow slid down with them. German voices echoed faintly above as they reached the ridge and found the trench empty. The lead German scout shouted to his squad. They searched for prints. They found shallow marks that ended abruptly near the lip. They could not see the rope, which blended into the snow and debris. The rope lay low and partially buried. The scouts fired bursts downhill, guessing at movement. Their rounds hit trees and scattered white powder, but no target appeared. The platoon reached the bottom of the slope. The path narrowed again. Thorne slowed. He felt for a small identifying knot that marked the upcoming split. His fingers touched it. The rope divided into two lines. One route led toward a wider clearing. The other bent sharply through thick spruce thickets. The clearing offered speed but increased visibility. The thicket route slowed movement but provided concealment. Thorne chose concealment. He tugged the left line and guided the men into the tight channel. Branches scraped helmets and gear. Snow clung to jackets. The platoon crawled through the thicket. The rope stayed within reach. The path angled toward a hidden drop behind a ridge shadow. Thorne designed this section for situations where enemy scouts came close to discovering the path. This was one of those moments. German scouts reached the slope above. They shouted orders and slid down the incline. They fired into the trees. They searched for signs of movement. Their boots crushed snow in heavy bursts. They scanned with flashlights. Light beams passed within yards of the thicket entrance. The Americans remained silent. The rope held them together. No one spoke. No one shifted more than necessary. Thorne advanced through the tight channel. He counted knots again. 1 knot. 2 knots. 3. These marked the shallow bowl ahead, a natural depression that shielded sound. He reached the bowl's edge and stepped inside. The ground dipped smoothly. Trees grew in tight clusters. The bowl created a dead zone that German scouts rarely entered because of poor visibility. The platoon gathered inside the bowl. They crouched low. Snow fell softly. Their breath condensed in short streams. Malin checked the perimeter and confirmed the Germans had not followed the correct angle. The rope path held. The design worked again. Thorne scanned the bowl and located the exit point. He kneeled beside the rope and checked the anchor. Held firm. They moved toward the final segment. This section led to an abandoned logging track that ran parallel to the main American line. Thorne discovered it earlier but avoided marking it on the map. The track remained concealed by fallen branches. It offered enough space for controlled movement without exposing the platoon to open angles. German pursuit slowed. The scouts spread out. They found no prints. They grew unsure of direction. Their reports reached their squad leader, who cursed the unexpected disappearance. He suspected a hidden ravine or a concealed trench. He did not consider a rope system designed by a stage rigger. The Americans pressed forward. They reached the logging track and moved as a group. Malin checked his watch. They were making good time. Radio contact resumed. The radio man transmitted position data and confirmed withdrawal under fire. He referenced German squads moving along the northeast ridge. Command recorded the information and updated defensive planning. Thorne kept scanning the terrain. He wanted to ensure no German patrol cut across the track unexpectedly. The woods remained dark. Snow softened the outline of everything. He looked back at the men. They followed with discipline. The rope system gave them confidence. It removed guesswork from retreat under pressure. The track curved and led toward a sheltered copse near a frozen stream. Beyond that copse lay the new fallback point. American positions held the stream line with machine guns and overlapping fields of fire. Once the platoon reached that line, they would be safe. Thorne increased pace. He wanted to reach the copse before German units regrouped and resumed pursuit. At 2,225 hours, they reached the stream. The fallback point came into view. American sentries raised their rifles until Malin called out the authentication signal. The platoon crossed into friendly lines. Men collapsed behind snow berms, exhausted but alive. Officers approached to confirm the identity of each returning soldier. Malin reported the details. He explained how the Germans attempted another flank cut. He described how the rope system allowed the platoon to withdraw while under direct pursuit. Officers listened closely. They took notes. One officer asked how long the route took to build. Thorne answered with careful precision. He described the anchor points, knot patterns, and distances. The officer nodded thoughtfully. The men received hot drinks. Steam rose from the cups and vanished into the cold air. Relief washed across tired faces. Thorne sat against a tree and exhaled slowly. He looked at his gloves, worn from gripping the rope for hours. He cleaned them with a cloth and inspected each finger for cuts. The job was not finished. He would need to rebuild new paths if the unit returned to another exposed position. An intelligence officer arrived soon after. He asked Malin and Thorn for specifics on German squad movements, armament and formation. Thorn described what he saw while setting the path. He mentioned the ridge angle, the scout spacing and their likely staging point. Intelligence officers appreciated such precise detail. They marked it on their maps and adjusted expectations for the next German probe. The rope system became a subject of discussion across the fallback line. Soldiers from other platoons approached Thorn to ask how it worked. He showed them simple knots and basic anchor setups. He emphasized silent movement and distance counting. He explained how rope guides allowed troops to escape even in total whiteout conditions. Thorn spent the next hour answering questions from soldiers who wanted to build their own escape guides. He explained how to choose anchor points that blended naturally with the terrain. He warned them not to tie ropes too high. High ropes risked detection. Low ropes guided movement without catching light or casting unusual shadows. He demonstrated simple knots that indicated distance changes. He showed how tension differed when routing through thick brush compared to narrow gullies. The men listened closely. They recognized the value of something that kept a platoon alive under conditions where visibility collapsed and enemy infiltration patterns changed without warning. Malin watched the small gathering. He understood that Thorn's contribution was more than luck. It came from a lifetime of rigging, hauling lines, and designing escape routes for performers who needed reliability in darkness. Combat rewarded skill, not theory. Thorn applied his skill with precision. Malin saw the difference in how other soldiers viewed him now. Respect replaced mockery. Interest replaced doubt. At 2,330 hours, headquarters sent a courier with a formal request. They wanted Thorn to provide a detailed field guide on rope line placement that could be distributed to company-level units by morning. Their goal was simple. Reduce casualties from encirclement. Improve mobility during withdrawals. Increase survival odds for forward observers who operated close to the German line. Thorn accepted the request without hesitation. He sat beside a lantern in a dugout and wrote steadily despite numb fingers. He outlined essential principles. Keep ropes anchored at consistent intervals. Use simple knots for counting. Choose routes that move through dead ground. Test the path before nightfall. Never rely on a single escape lane. Build two if terrain allows. He included notes on how snow altered tension. He explained how to conceal rope lines with fallen branches. He added warnings about slopes that became too slick after mortar blasts. The guide grew to several pages. Malin reviewed it, corrected a few phrases, and added a short endorsement based on real combat results. The courier returned at midnight. He collected the guide and carried it toward battalion headquarters. Thorn leaned back against the wall of the dugout and closed his eyes. He did not rest long. At 0020 hours, distant artillery fire woke him. The Germans shelled positions across the ridge. The pattern suggested probing fire to test soft points. Snow shook loose. The ground vibrated. Officers ordered everyone to stand by. Throughout the night, German patrols continued pushing along the flanks. They searched for gaps. They probed for retreating Americans. They hoped to catch a small unit moving without cover. Their attempts failed repeatedly. Units that used rope lines moved with speed and silence. They left no obvious trail. Whenever German scouts reached a position marked for withdrawal, the Americans were already gone. By dawn, reports spread across the sector. At least 3 platoons avoided near encirclements by using newly built rope guides based on Thorn's instructions. One unit escaped through a thick thicket that even local guides believed impassable. Another crossed a steep drainage cut without losing formation. Officers who once laughed at the idea now asked for more detailed guidance. At 0720 hours, a staff officer visited Thorn. He carried new questions. He wanted to know how to adapt rope guides for nighttime counter-infiltration. Could ropes guide small American teams into enemy-controlled woods without sound? Thorn considered the question carefully before answering. Rope guides worked best for withdrawal. Using them offensively introduced risk. They could compromise position if discovered. Thorn explained this clearly. The officer accepted the reasoning. Malin led a brief debriefing of the previous night's combat. He summarized how the Germans advanced. He described the flanking movement with precision. He highlighted the moment when the rope path saved the platoon from a tightening trap. Intelligence officers wrote down every detail. They requested approximate timing, distances, and approach angles. These details helped predict future infiltration attempts. Thorne stayed quiet for most of the meeting. When asked, he gave direct answers. He described anchor placement. He described how he detected enemy approach by listening for rhythm changes in the forest. He explained why he routed the path through thicket rather than the clearing. The officers listened carefully. His reasoning matched battlefield results. After the meeting, a senior officer requested to see the original rope network near the previous forward position. Malin agreed to guide him. Thorne joined them. They walked through snow that had frozen into a thin crust. The forest looked unchanged, but scars from last night's fighting marked several trunks. Splintered bark and fresh bullet holes lined the ridge. When they reached the area where Thorne had built the rope path, they found no rope. Thorne had collected it all during withdrawal. He wanted to avoid leaving evidence that could teach the enemy. Malin described the layout. Thorne pointed out anchor locations. He showed how he used natural cover to break silhouettes. The officer examined every detail with interest. He asked how long it took to build. Thorne answered with calm precision. He explained how practice reduced setup time. The officer nodded. He said the system would be implemented across multiple observation posts before nightfall. He commended Thorne for his ingenuity. Thorne listened respectfully but said little. He preferred building rope lines to receiving praise. As they returned to the fallback position, word spread across the company that a commendation recommendation had been submitted for Thorne. Soldiers congratulated him. Some offered brief smiles. Thorne responded with quiet nods. He understood recognition mattered, but he focused on readiness. The Germans were still out there. Snow muffled sound but not movement. The next infiltration could come at any hour. By afternoon, fresh snow fell. Battalion issued updated defensive orders. They planned to reposition several units to prepare for a possible large-scale push. Forward observers needed safe escape lanes. Rope guides were now standard operating procedure. Malin ordered Thorne to begin training 2 additional squads. Thorne demonstrated line placement with efficient clarity. Men practiced knot counts with gloves. They learned to identify anchor tension by feel. The training spread quickly. At 1,600 hours, a runner delivered a short written message to Malin. The Germans were preparing another flanking probe near the northeastern ridge. Units must stay alert. Thorne reviewed the terrain map and noted where rope guides would be most effective. He suggested reinforcing a particular drainage gully with additional anchor points. Malin approved. Thorne prepared another coil and moved into the woods to set it. The air felt heavy. Snow fell in slow spirals. The forest grew darker as clouds thickened. Thorne studied the slope carefully. He chose anchor points that allowed men to descend quickly without sliding uncontrollably. He tied knots that indicated shifts in grade. He hid the rope beneath loose snow and leaf debris. He finished the line as evening approached. That night, German activity increased again. They probed the northeastern ridge with more confidence. Their squads moved in teams. Their spacing was tighter. They communicated with short bursts of whispered commands. American riflemen prepared to engage. Machine gunners checked feeds. Mortar crews waited for coordinates. At 2,215 hours, the Germans launched a coordinated infiltration. They pushed 2 squads along the ridge. They targeted the drainage gully that now held Thorne's newest rope line. Their plan aimed to trap American observers operating close to the front. Thorne recognized the danger instantly. He had traced that terrain. He knew the Germans could overrun the observers quickly if the withdrawal path collapsed. Malin ordered Thorne to lead a rescue movement. Thorne took 5 men and advanced toward the gully. Snow crunched under each step. They moved fast but stayed low. The moon created faint highlights across the frozen ground. Thorne reached the gully's crest and listened. German voices came from below. They moved with certainty. They believed the gully held trapped Americans. Thorne signaled for silence. He approached the rope line and felt for the first knot. He knew the layout. He designed it. He moved downward. His men followed. They stayed hidden beneath the gully rim. They heard German boots moving nearby. They saw brief flashes of light from shuttered lamps. The enemy was close. At the base of the gully they found the observation team. 4 men waited behind a fallen log. They held their rifles tightly. Their retreat path was cut. Thorne motioned for them to follow. He placed their hands on the rope and guided them upward. Noise from above grew louder. German scouts had reached the rim. They prepared to fire into the gully. Thorne moved quickly. The rope guided the combined group through the steepest section. They reached a narrow bend. German scouts shouted. A flare lit the sky. Light flooded the trees. Shadows stretched across the snow. The Americans held still. Thorne waited for the flare to fade. When darkness returned, he pulled the rope and signaled movement. The group reached the top of the gully seconds before Germans swept the area. Once again, Thorne's rope design saved an isolated team from encirclement. They regrouped behind friendly lines and relayed new intelligence gained from close observation of German formations. The rope system became more than a simple escape method. It became a tactical asset that shaped how American units survived infiltration in the Ardennes. Thorne's name circulated through battalion reports. Command recognized him as a soldier whose civilian skill altered battlefield outcomes. His innovation preserved lives and strengthened intelligence flow during a critical phase of the winter campaign.